Dad, the doctors said you're not fit to manage your own finances anymore. Just sign the papers, I'll handle everything. That's what my son told me. While sitting in the glass atrium of my Aspen mansion, sunlight bouncing off the marble floor like a spotlight on betrayal. He didn't even flinch when he said it. Lucas crossed one leg over the other, looking every bit the Silicon Valley genius he fancied himself to be, Italian suit, Rolex gleaming, and a face that had forgotten what humility looked like. The same son whose private school tuition I paid with 5 a.m. design jobs. The same son whose tech startup I rescued twice when investors pulled out. The same son I handed my first company shares to thinking legacy meant loyalty. Apparently I was wrong. My name is Edward Langford, 72 years old. I came to Aspen 45 years ago with a used drafting board, 2 broken pencils, and a promise to my late wife, Margaret. One day, we'll build homes that make people feel alive. Together, we built Langford Design Group, designing resorts and estates from California to Colorado. By the time I turned 65, we'd created homes for billionaires, yet the one that mattered most was this one. The Langford Mansion sat on 8 acres overlooking Maroon Creek, appraised last fall at $5.2 million. Paid off every beam and stone earned with sweat and faith, and now my only son wanted it signed away. Dad, Lucas continued sliding a thick folder across the table. This is for your protection. You're 72 and, well, sometimes you forget things. Like what I asked. He forced a pitying smile. Last week you left the stove on. I laughed. It's an induction range, Lucas. It shuts off automatically. Sitting beside him, my daughter-in-law Sabrina laid a manicured hand on his arm. Sweetheart, don't get upset. Your father's just adjusting. It's hard to accept aging. Adjusting. Aging. Those words cut deeper than I expected. Sabrina had that effortless confidence money gives to those who never had to earn it. Gold earrings shaped like serpents, a designer bag that probably cost more than my first drafting table. She'd been posting photos from Manhattan and Monaco captioned, "Manifesting Abundance." I guess her next manifestation was my house. Lucas cleared his throat. This is a standard durable power of attorney. You sign, I take care of everything, bills, taxes, the estate. You can focus on relaxing. Relaxing. That's how he said it. As if retirement was a sedative. I flipped through the pages, 25 in total, and noticed something peculiar. The document already listed my next of kin as primary trustee, Lucas Langford. The legal language gave him full control over my financial and medical decisions, effective immediately. I looked up slowly. How long have you been preparing this? Dad, this isn't about preparation, he said quickly. It's about safety. You've been forgetful lately. You nearly missed paying property tax last quarter. Because I was waiting on an updated valuation, I replied evenly. He sighed, pretending to be patient. You're overreacting. I just want what's best for you. But I'd spent a lifetime reading contracts. Every project I designed came with 50 pages of legal jargon. I knew what hidden clauses looked like. And there it was, buried on page 19, paragraph 4. Upon transfer of fiduciary authority, all assets under Langford Design Group and the Langford estate shall be consolidated under the trustee's management for liquidity purposes. In plain English, once I signed, Lucas could liquidate my life's work. I closed the folder. I'll think about it, I said quietly. Lucas frowned. There's nothing to think about. It's already drafted. I said I'll think about it. Sabrina's tone turned brittle. Edward, darling, you can't just leave important documents unsigned. The attorney's waiting downstairs. I'm aware I said standin' up. Let him wait. Lucas's patience cracked. Dad, stop being difficult. You're not 25 anymore. You need help. I smiled faintly. Funny. When you needed $500,000 to cover your failed crypto fund, I didn't call you incompetent. His jaw tightened. Sabrina's expression turned icy. As I watched them walk toward the glass doors, confident, certain, untouchable, I realized something: betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks out of your house wearing your last name, and at that moment, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was the opening scene. Before I take you deeper into this story, tell me, where are you watching from? Aspen, New York, or somewhere far away, where family still means something? The next morning, a black SUV was already in my driveway before sunrise. I watched through the window as two men in tailored coats stepped out, briefcases in hand. Lucas wasn't wasting time. He greeted them at the door like he owned the place. Dad, he said cheerfully, these are professionals from the Aspen Geriatric Evaluation Board. They're here to make sure everything's in order. A cognitive evaluation, they called it. But I could see the script. It wasn't about my health. It was about paperwork. They asked me to draw a clock, remember 3 words, count backward from 100. I did every test twice flawlessly. Still, one of them wrote something down and whispered to the other. 5 minutes later, Lucas got a text and smiled. It was all a performance, one I wasn't supposed to notice. After they left, Lucas walked into my study with that same artificial kindness. Dad, you did great, he said, setting his hand on my shoulder. These things are just protocol. We want you safe. Safe from what I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he picked up the family photo on my desk, me, Margaret, and a 6-year-old Lucas standing in front of our first house in Denver. He turned it over, looked at it like it belonged to someone else. I'm just trying to protect what you built, he said quietly. That's all. Then he left for Denver. That afternoon, I called my financial advisor, the same one who'd worked with Margaret and me for 30 years. His voice was hesitant. Mr. Langford, your son contacted me yesterday, he said. He requested copies of your portfolio, citing pending guardianship paperwork. Guardianship, I repeated slowly. Yes, sir. He claimed the family was concerned about your mental capacity. My pulse steadied instead of racing. When you faced betrayal, that close panic doesn't help. Calculation does. I logged into my bank accounts, everything still intact. The mansion deed, the design firm shares the royalties from past projects. All still in my name. For now. At 6:00 p.m., I received an email. No greeting. Just a PDF attachment, power of attorney, Langford Estate. Sabrina had typed it herself. The subject line read, "Please sign tonight. We've scheduled the notary for 10 a.m. tomorrow." They really thought I'd fold that easily. But what caught my attention wasn't the document. It was the CC line. She'd copied an attorney from Denver named Daniel Shore, one of Lucas's old college friends. The same man recently sued for elder exploitation in Boulder County. That confirmed it. This wasn't concern. This was strategy. I made tea, sat by the fireplace, and opened the last leather-bound journal my wife Margaret had written before she died. She'd filled it with architectural sketches, Bible verses, and letters she never sent. One note was addressed to me, Edward. If success ever turns our son blind, remember integrity has its own architecture. Build with that when the rest collapses. I could almost hear her voice again, calm and steady as the mountain wind. For the first time since Lucas arrived, I didn't feel old. I felt awake. That night, I went to my studio, the place where Margaret and I designed every blueprint that made our fortune. I opened her old file cabinet second drawer from the bottom, labeled Emergency Trusts. Inside were 6 sealed envelopes dated years ago. She'd always believed in preparing for storms long before the clouds appeared. The last one was marked in her handwriting. Activate only if our legacy is under threat. I held it under the lamplight and whispered, "Margaret, looks like it's raining." By midnight, I had read the entire plan, a series of legal steps Margaret had drafted with our attorney Harold McLean decades ago. It outlined how to transfer every asset we owned into a charitable foundation within 72 hours of fraudulent guardianship or power of attorney filings. Every signature, every witness already prepared, waiting for my call. It was the kind of foresight only my wife could have, part love, part prophecy. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing embers. Lucas thought he'd trapped me with lawyers and fake doctors, but he'd forgotten who designed his world and the woman who built its blueprints. This wasn't the end of my freedom. This was the beginning of his education. I realized then, God doesn't always stop the storm. Sometimes He just leaves you the instructions to build a roof before it starts. 2 days later, the snow came early to Aspen. Thick, heavy flakes blanketed the pines outside, muting the world into silence. Inside that silence, deceit has a way of sounding louder. Lucas and Sabrina were staying in the guest wing to help with paperwork, or so they said. By evening, they'd moved their laptops into the dining room, turning my home into their office. Every time I walked past, their voices dropped to whispers. Old men aren't supposed to hear well. They forgot that architects notice details, sounds, shadows, patterns. And that night, I noticed everything. At exactly 9:47 p.m., I went downstairs for tea. The hall was dark except for the light spilling under the dining room door. I stopped when I heard Sabrina's voice. "Lucas, we need that money before the quarter ends," she said sharply. "The investors are threatening to pull out of Halotech." I know, he snapped. "But Dad won't sign unless the doctors say he's unfit." "Then make him unfit. File the petition. We already have Shore ready to notarize." My chest went cold. They weren't even pretending anymore. Lucas poured a drink. I heard the clink of ice. "Relax. By the time the court hearing happens, everything will be in my name. The Aspen house, the company shares the accounts. We'll sell, pay off the debts, and start fresh." Sabrina laughed softly. "You mean I'll start fresh? You're the one who got us into this mess." "Don't start that again, Sabrina." "Oh, please," she sneered. "Your father handed you a multi-million-dollar company, and you blew it chasing crypto schemes. If I hadn't married you, you'd still be drawing blueprints for him." "Enough," Lucas hissed. "Once this is done, we'll be set. We'll move to Manhattan, invest in new projects. Nobody will even remember this." I leaned closer, barely breathing. Sabrina's heels clicked against the floor as she paced. "And what about the old man? What about him?" Lucas replied. He'll figure it out. You know he's not as senile as you made him sound. Lucas laughed short, cruel. It doesn't matter. Once the court grants guardianship, he's legally a spectator. He can scream, but nobody listens to old men with medical notes. Silence. Then Sabrina said almost gently, Do you ever feel guilty about what? About stealing from your father? He hesitated. No. He had his run. It's my turn. That's when I realized I wasn't listening to my son. I was listening to a stranger wearing his face. The stranger who once played with model houses on my drafting table now planned to dismantle the real one brick by brick. I stepped back quietly, heart pounding with a mix of fury and clarity. Every architect knows when the foundation cracks, you don't patch it, you rebuild from the ground up. I went back to my study and called Harold McLean, my old business partner and lawyer. He picked up on the first ring. Edward, I was just thinking about you. I'm glad I said. Because we've got a storm coming. I told him everything, the fake evaluation, the power of attorney, the overheard conversation. Harold sighed. Lucas always wanted shortcuts. You gave him a company and he wanted a kingdom. What can we do? He hesitated. The trust Margaret created, it's still valid. If we activate it now, all your assets transfer to the Langford Foundation within 72 hours. But you'll need to sign before they file the guardianship petition. When's the hearing? I checked the docket. They filed yesterday. The hearing's Monday at 10 a.m. I looked at the clock. Friday night. 48 hours. Then we move fast, I said. File the activation tonight. Edward, Harold warned. This means you'll lose personal ownership of everything, the mansion, the company. It'll all belong to the foundation. I understand. He paused. And you're okay with that? I looked toward Margaret's old piano by the window, still covered in dust. She always said what we build only matters if it outlives us. Let's make sure it does. When I hung up, the snow outside had stopped. The moonlight reflected off the white fields, turning everything silver, cold, quiet, and perfect for rebuilding. I opened my journal and wrote one line. The blueprint of revenge is drawn with patience. Maybe God doesn't punish betrayal. He just gives the betrayed enough wisdom to finish the story. By dawn, the mountains had turned gold. The kind of gold that used to make Margaret smile and say, "See, Edward, even God likes color." I brewed my coffee, opened the envelope she'd left behind, and began reading what felt less like paperwork and more like prophecy. The emergency clause was meticulous, every line written in my wife's neat looping cursive. She'd drafted it 15 years earlier after I'd watched a friend lose everything to a greedy nephew. People change when money whispers, she'd said then. Promise me if that whisper ever reaches our son, you'll know what to do. Now I finally understood why she'd prepared for a storm I didn't want to believe could come. The plan was a 3-step trigger transfer, all physical and digital assets, real estate shares and royalties, into the Langford Foundation for Architectural Education, a charitable trust registered in Denver under both our names. Freeze all bank accounts linked to my personal SSN until the court verified my competence. Notify the foundation's board chair, Reverend Thomas Hale, a longtime friend of Margaret's, who held the legal power to finalize the transfer. In short, once activated, no one, not even my own son, could touch a single cent. At 8:30 a.m., I drove down the icy highway to Harold McLean's office in downtown Aspen. Harold was waiting, old but sharp as ever, gray hair, slicked back glasses hanging from a gold chain. "Margaret always did think ahead," he said, scanning the documents. "You realize this effectively moves everything out of your name." "I realize," I said. "Lucas wanted control. I'll give him an empty vault instead." He chuckled softly. "There's that Langford precision, I remember. We spent the next 2 hours signing, notarizing, and filing. By noon, the Langford Foundation was officially the sole owner of my company, shares, my patents, and even the deed to my $5.2 million mansion. But there was one thing left to do. "Harold," I said, "we need to make sure the records update before Lucas's attorney files his final guardianship claim." "They'll process it in 24 hours, Harold replied, tapping his pen. "By the time Lucas gets to court Monday morning, the estate won't legally belong to you anymore." I smiled for the first time in days. Then by Monday, he'll be arguing over heir. That evening, I sat at Margaret's piano, the one she loved more than any view. It hadn't been tuned since the funeral. I pressed a single key. The note rang, flat-tired like me. I thought about the boy who used to sit beside me while I worked building houses out of Lego blocks and calling them castles. When did that boy become a man who thought his father was disposable? It would have been easier to stay angry. But anger burns fast. What I needed was endurance, the kind Margaret always had when she drew blueprints at 2 a.m. while humming old hymns under her breath. I whispered into the empty room, "You still building with me, sweetheart?" The wind outside rattled the window like a quiet answer. At 9:00 p.m., my phone buzzed. "Lucas." "Dad," he began, his voice too calm. "The notary's coming tomorrow morning. Sabrina said you didn't sign the documents." "I didn't." A pause. "You're making this difficult for both of us." "You mean inconvenient?" "Dad," he said, exhaling. "I'm trying to protect what you built." "No," I replied. "You're trying to sell what I built." He didn't respond, just silence, thick, bitter silence before he hung up. I turned off the phone and stared into the fireplace. Flames licked the edges of the wood, slow but relentless. That was how revenge worked when you built it right, not in fury, but in precision. I thought about all the nights Margaret and I prayed for wisdom, not wealth. She believed faith was just architecture for the soul, invisible but load-bearing. That night I understood. Because faith doesn't build walls, it builds exits. If you're still watching this part of the story, type 1 in the comments. Let me know you're still here, believing like I do that truth always finds its foundation. Saturday morning, 6th, 12 a.m. The sky over Aspen was pale blue, the kind that almost looks peaceful if you don't know what's brewing beneath it. I wasn't drinking coffee for comfort anymore. I was drinking it for clarity. Because when you're at war with your own blood, you can't afford to blink first. By the time Lucas woke up in the guest wing, I had already made 4 phone calls and sent 3 emails. Every architect knows before you build, you measure. Before you strike, you document. First call, Dr. Elaine Porter, my longtime physician. She picked up immediately. "Edward, I heard rumors about a competency evaluation. Rumors are generous," I said. "My son staged one." Dr. Porter sighed. "They sent me a copy of the so-called report. It's unsigned, unlicensed, and full of errors." One of the evaluators isn't even a certified neurologist. Do you want me to issue a statement? I want you to write the truth, I said. That I'm as competent as I was 10 years ago, maybe more. By 7:45 a.m., she'd emailed a notarized medical letter declaring I was mentally fit and in full cognitive health. Second call, Reverend Thomas Hale, the chair of the Langford Foundation. He answered in his deep, steady voice, the same one that had read Margaret's eulogy. Edward, I've reviewed the activation papers. The assets have transferred. Legally, everything is now under the foundation. So Lucas can't touch a dime, not without committing federal fraud. I smiled. Then let's make sure the records are visible to the court docket. Reverend Hale agreed to file the updated ownership documents with the county registry before the weekend ended. That way, even if Lucas tried to rush into court, the judge would see the truth first. Third call, Aspen First National Bank. I asked to speak to the branch manager, a man I'd known since we designed their new building in 2004. Mr. Langford, he said carefully, your son visited yesterday asking about large transfers, claimed to be acting under your authority. And did he have any? None. We denied access. Good, I said. If he returns, notify the state attorney's office. He's impersonating a trustee. The manager hesitated. I'm sorry, sir. I never thought. Don't apologize, I said. You just helped me prove intent. By noon, I had enough to build a case. Still, I needed one last witness. Someone close enough to Lucas to confirm his motives. So I called Alex Barrett, his former business partner from Halo Tech. When he answered, he sounded tired, the kind of tired that money can't fix. Edward, I was expecting your call. Were you? Lucas burned every bridge he crossed. He told investors last week that once he got control of your estate, he'd have fresh capital. Did he put that in writing? Check your inbox, Alex said. I sent you the email thread. And there it was. Lucas bragging about unlocking $6 million in frozen equity once Dad's too senile to object. Proof. Not just betrayal, but premeditation. That evening, I met Harold McLean at his office again. He looked almost excited, like a chess master seeing the board finally tilt his way. Edward, he said, flipping through the papers. This is airtight. We've got medical validation, bank statements, and written intent. Monday's hearing will be over before it begins. I don't want it over fast, I replied. I want it public. Harold raised an eyebrow. Public, yes. I want him to learn what it means to humiliate the man who built his foundation. He leaned back in his chair, a slow grin spreading. You really are your wife's student. We spent hours drafting motions, one to invalidate the guardianship petition, another to press preliminary charges of attempted financial exploitation under Colorado state law. Every document was timed, witnessed, and sealed before midnight. Outside, snow began to fall again. Heavy, quiet, relentless. I stood at the window watching the flakes melt against the glass and thought of all the nights Margaret worked beside me while our son slept upstairs. People think revenge is fueled by anger. It's not. It's fueled by memory, and memory is stronger than hate. Some storms aren't sent to destroy you. They come to prove what your foundation's made of. Sunday evening, the house felt like a cathedral, quiet, echoing, and waiting for confession. The snow had stopped, leaving a blanket of white that made every shadow stand taller. I was sitting by the fireplace when the door opened behind me. Sabrina stepped in her heels, clicking softly on the stone floor. She was wearing one of those fur-collared coats that looked like it came straight from a designer ad, perfect, cold, and expensive. "Edward," she said sweetly, "we need to talk." I didn't turn around. "About what, the weather or your next property listing?" She sighed, a theatrical sound. "Lucas is upset. He thinks you're angry." "I'm not angry," I said, stirring the fire with the poker. "I'm observant. Then you must know he's under a lot of pressure." She continued, taking a seat across from me. "The company, the investors, it's all collapsing. He's just trying to hold on by staging a fake medical report." Her smile faltered for a moment. "He didn't mean for it to go that far." "Didn't he?" I said quietly. "Because I listened to you both the other night. Every word." Sabrina's eyes narrowed. "You were eavesdropping." "I was home," I replied. "It's hard not to overhear when betrayal echoes through your own walls." She stood abruptly. "Look, I came here to help you understand. If you go through with whatever you're planning, you'll destroy Lucas. You'll ruin his career, his reputation." I looked up at her, finally meeting her eyes. "He's the one who ruined them, Sabrina. I'm just giving the truth a microphone." She crossed her arms. "He's your son." "I know." I set the poker down, the metal hissing as it hit the grate. "That's what makes this hurt instead of just amuse me." Sabrina hesitated, softening her voice. "You can stop this. Reverse whatever you've done. Give him a chance to fix it. Fix it." I laughed under my breath. "You don't fix greed, Sabrina. You starve it." For the first time since I'd known her, she didn't have an answer. The silence between us stretched until even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Then she whispered, almost pleading, "Edward, what do you want?" I looked at the framed sketch of the first house Margaret and I ever designed. What did I want? Not revenge, not money, just peace. And peace requires truth. "I want my wife's name to mean something after I'm gone," I said. "And I want my son to learn what it costs when you forget where you came from." Sabrina's lip trembled slightly. "You'd really throw away millions to make a point?" I smiled faintly. "No, my dear. I'm investing them in something that outlasts people like you." Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then back at me. "Lucas will fight this. He's already talking to the judge." "Good," I said, standing. "I'll see him there." Sabrina turned to leave, but paused at the door. "He's still your son," she repeated softly, like she wanted to believe saying it out loud could make it true. When she was gone, I sat back down and stared into the fire. Flames curled around the logs, licking upward, alive and merciless. It reminded me of Margaret's favorite saying, "Faith without action is just decoration." I hadn't been to church much since her funeral, but that night I closed my eyes and spoke to the God she always believed listened. "Lord," I said quietly, "I'm not asking for mercy. I'm asking for direction. If justice is part of your design, let tomorrow be the day the truth speaks louder than money." When I opened my eyes, one ember broke free and landed on the hearth, glowing alone before fading to ash. That's how I felt, used up maybe, but still burning where it mattered. I realized then faith isn't about waiting for miracles. It's about standing in the fire long enough to become one. No more anger, no more hesitation. Tomorrow would decide not just who owned the estate, but who deserved the Langford name. And when the sun rose over the frozen peaks, I'd be ready to face my son, not as a father begging for love, but as a man reclaiming his dignity. Monday, 9:58 a.m. Pitkin County Courthouse smelled of old wood-cold marble and fear, mostly Lucas's. He stood by the bench, tailored suit, flawless, but his hands betrayed him. They kept twitching at his cuffs. Beside him, Sabrina scrolled on her phone, pretending not to care. For people who wanted control, they suddenly looked like children waiting for detention. The clerk called out Langford versus Langford. Petition for guardianship review. That's what it had come to, father against son. I rose with Harold McLean at my side. 76 years old, half deaf and still sharper than any lawyer in the room. He carried a single brown briefcase and the quiet confidence of a man who's already seen justice win before. Judge Harriet Colton presided, silver hair, calm voice, eyes that missed nothing. She looked at me, then at Lucas. Mr. Langford, this court has received a petition filed by your son claiming you are unfit to manage your own affairs. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. And you are here to contest it. I'm here, I said, to prove that I'm the only one in this room still fit to tell the truth. A few quiet laughs rippled from the gallery. Judge Colton raised a brow but didn't scold. Proceed. Lucas's attorney, Daniel Shore, the same man who'd been sued for elder exploitation last year, rose and buttoned his jacket. Your Honor, my client's only concern is his father's safety. Mr. Langford Sr. has demonstrated increasing confusion, mismanagement of funds, and paranoia regarding his own family. Do you have medical evidence? The judge asked. We do, Shore said, holding up a folder. A neurocognitive assessment conducted last week. Harold stepped forward. Your Honor, that report is invalid. The examiner listed is not a licensed neurologist. Furthermore, Dr. Elaine Porter, Mr. Langford's actual physician, has submitted a signed letter attesting to his full cognitive health. Judge Colton flipped through the papers. I have that letter on file. Shore's smile thinned. With respect, one doctor's opinion doesn't erase a pattern of behavior. Harold adjusted his glasses. Then perhaps we should address that pattern, a pattern of financial desperation. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of printed emails. These are messages between Mr. Lucas Langford and his former business partner, Alex Barrett, discussing plans to unlock $6 million in frozen equity once Dad's too senile to object. Dated 2 weeks before this petition was filed. A low murmur spread through the courtroom. Sabrina went pale. Lucas's attorney grabbed the papers, scanning them quickly, whispering something that made Lucas's jaw tighten. Judge Colton looked up. Mr. Langford Jr., do you dispute these emails? Lucas swallowed hard. They're out of context. I'm sure they are, Harold said smoothly. Out of context, just like the fake medical report, the fraudulent guardianship petition, and the sudden interest in your father's $5.2 million estate. Objection, Shore barked. Counsel is implying criminal intent. Withdrawn, Harold said calmly, but noted. Then he gestured to the clerk. Your Honor, we call Reverend Thomas Hale to the stand. The Reverend took his oath, then spoke in a voice that filled the room like a church bell. I am the chair of the Langford Foundation. 2 days ago, I received and processed a transfer of ownership for Mr. Langford Sr.'s company shares, estate, and intellectual property. The trust was created 15 years ago by his late wife, Margaret Langford, specifically to protect against fraudulent exploitation by family members. The judge leaned forward. So to be clear, as of now, the estate no longer belongs to either party here? That's correct, Reverend Hale said. It belongs to the foundation. Any attempt to control or sell it would constitute fraud. You could have heard a pin drop. Lucas's face turned a shade paler than marble. Sabrina reached for his hand, but he pulled away. Mr. Langford, Jr., the judge said slowly, "Did you know about this trust?" Lucas's mouth opened, then closed. "No, Your Honor." Then why? Harold asked gently. "Were you promising investors money you didn't have?" No answer. Judge Colton sighed. "I've seen greed destroy families before, but I rarely see it documented this clearly." She shuffled her notes. "The court finds no evidence of incompetence. The guardianship petition is dismissed. Mr. Langford Sr. retains all legal rights. Furthermore, this matter will be referred to the state attorney's office for review of possible fraudulent filings." The gavel came down like thunder. Lucas flinched at the sound the same way he did when he was a boy, and I caught him lying. I turned to Harold and whispered, "One more draft, Margaret. One more perfect line." He smiled. "You always did love symmetry." The courtroom emptied in silence. Reporters waited in the hall. Cameras flashed. Someone asked Mr. Langford, "How does it feel to win against your own son?" I paused, looking back at the double doors closing behind Lucas. "It doesn't feel like winning," I said quietly. "It feels like mourning the living." And as I stepped out into the cold mountain air, the snow began again, light, gentle, almost merciful. The courthouse steps were slick with half-melted snow. Reporters shouted questions, microphone flashing like lightning, but I walked past them all. Harold carried the briefcase. I carried the silence. Because the truth doesn't need a headline. It just needs to breathe. We reached the parking lot before he finally spoke. "Well, Edward," he said with a weary smile, 15 years of trust law just paid off." "Margaret paid off," I corrected. "I only followed the blueprint." He nodded. "You realize what happens next, don't you? Lucas loses everything he tried to steal," I said quietly. "And I lose what I thought I still had a son." The wind howled through the pines, carrying that truth away before it could sting too much. By the time I returned to the mansion, the snow had stopped again, a strange mercy from the Colorado weather. Inside, everything was still exactly where I left it. The firewood stacked neatly, Margaret's piano untouched, the folder of court documents sitting on my desk like a tombstone for the past week of my life. I poured myself a drink. Not to celebrate, just to mark survival. The house was quiet for less than 10 minutes. Then tires crunched on the driveway. A knock followed, sharp and fast. I opened the door. Lucas stood there, face pale, tie undone, eyes wild. Sabrina trailed behind him. Mascara smudged her fur coat, half slipped from one shoulder. He pushed past me without waiting for permission. "You humiliated me," he shouted. "You made me look like a criminal." I closed the door slowly. "You didn't need my help for that." He spun around. "You had no right to do what you did, giving away the estate, the company, everything that was my inheritance." "Inheritance," I repeated. "You inherit values, Lucas. You earn property." He slammed his fist against the table. "You think this is over? I can appeal. You can dig," I interrupted softly. "But there's nothing left to bury." Sabrina tried to intervene, her voice trembling. Edward, please. We're broke. The investors are suing. Lucas got fired from his own firm. We just need time, I said. You took mine when you tried to sign my name away. She bit her lip, eyes glossy. He didn't mean to. Yes, he did. Lucas laughed bitterly. You think you're some kind of hero now? Donating everything to charity. What does that make me, the villain in your little morality play? You wrote your own role, son. He froze. That word son landed heavier than anything else I'd said. I did everything you ever wanted, he snapped. I got the degree built, the business made the connections. And still, you looked at me like I was never enough. I looked at him. Really looked. For a moment, I didn't see the lawyer who'd betrayed me. I saw the boy who once stood beside Margaret's drafting table covered in sawdust and crayons saying, "Someday I'll build something just like you, Dad." I never wanted you to be me, I said quietly. I wanted you to be good. Lucas's jaw trembled. Then he whispered almost to himself, I don't even know who I am anymore. That I said is the first honest thing you've said in years. He turned toward the door, muttering something about calling his attorney. Sabrina didn't follow. She lingered, staring at the floor. I'm sorry, she said finally. I didn't mean for this to go so far. You went exactly as far as greed takes everyone, I said. Past love, past reason, straight to regret. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't offer comfort. Some lessons have to hurt to stick. When they left, the mansion was quiet again. Not empty, just peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in months. I looked around the room. Every beam, every photograph, every sketch on the wall carried Margaret's touch. She used to say homes have heartbeats. You just have to stand still enough to hear them. And that night, for the first time since she died, I heard it again. The next morning, Harold called. Lucas's firm dropped him, he said. State bar's investigating. Sabrina filed for separation. I exhaled slowly. Not triumph, just release. He added, reporters keep asking for a statement. You want to give one? I looked out the window at the mountains, the snow shimmering like silver glass. Tell them I said that wealth is measured by what you can walk away from with your soul intact. 6 months later, spring came to Aspen, the way forgiveness comes to a scar, slow, reluctant, but certain. The snow melted off the roofs, rivers began to hum again, and the house that once felt like a battlefield now sounded like laughter and hammering. Contractors were walking through the halls, measuring doorways, painting walls, installing glass panels where Margaret's sketches would soon hang. The Langford mansion was no longer a private estate. It was becoming the Langford Center for Young Architects, a community hub and scholarship program for students who couldn't afford the education that once built my empire. I watched from the landing as sunlight spilled through the new skylight, landing on the piano Margaret used to play. For the first time in years, the light didn't hurt. It healed. Mr. Langford, one of the workers, called, Do you want to keep the study as is or open it up for the gallery? Leave it, I said. Some spaces aren't meant to be repurposed. They're meant to be remembered. He nodded and went back to work. I walked into the study, the same room where Lucas once tried to take everything from me. Now its shelves were lined with architecture books, blueprints, and a framed plaque that read, Integrity is the truest foundation. Margaret Langford, below, it sat a small box of her fountain pens. and beside them my wife's final design sketch, a house she never got to build. It would be the first project the foundation funded. Around noon, Reverend Hale arrived with 2 students from the University of Colorado, both scholarship recipients. They were wide-eyed, polite, a little nervous. One of them, a young woman with paint still under her fingernails, asked, "Sir, is it true you designed the Ridgeview Resort when you were only 30? I smiled. 30 and foolish. I thought concrete could fix anything. She laughed. My professors say the same thing about us. Reverend Hale gestured around. They'll be interning here this summer, learning how to design spaces that tell stories. I nodded. Good. Tell them the first rule of design. They both leaned forward. It's not about the walls, I said. It's about what they protect. They smiled, and for a brief moment I saw something that looked like Margaret's faith flickering in their eyes. After they left, Reverend Hale lingered. Edward, he said gently, there's a message for you. From Lucas. I didn't move. Email, letter. He handed me an envelope worn at the corners, postmarked from Denver. Inside, Lucas's handwriting, shaky, uneven. Dad. They suspended my license. I'm working construction now, small projects. I thought I'd hate it, but I don't. Turns out building with my hands clears my head. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to rebuild properly this time. Lucas, I read it twice, then folded it back carefully. Will you answer him? Reverend Hale asked. Not yet, I said. Some letters need to sit in the light for a while before you send anything back. He smiled. That sounds like Margaret talking. Maybe she's still designing through me. That evening after the workers left, I sat by the window overlooking the valley. The air smelled like pine and wet earth. The mountains glowed pink under the last light of day. I thought about everything I'd lost, a son, a legacy, a name that used to mean safety. But I also thought about everything I'd gained, truth, peace, and a purpose that no bank account could measure. People asked me why I donated the estate. The real answer was simple, because wealth without meaning is just weight. And for the first time in years, I felt light. I used to pray for justice. Now I just pray to stay grateful for the quiet after it arrives. The construction lights went out one by one. The mansion exhaled no longer a house of ambition, but a sanctuary of purpose. I ran my fingers along the piano keys and whispered, We did it, Margaret. You designed the foundation. I just built the walls. The morning of the grand opening came bright and still, the kind of spring morning Aspen saves for redemption stories. A white banner hung above the gate. The Langford Center for Young Architects Building Integrity, one design at a time. Dozens of cars lined the driveway. Students, teachers, journalists, and a few faces from the old construction crews Margaret and I had worked with decades ago filled the lawn. The piano was moved into the main hall. Flowers surrounded it, lilies her favorite. As I stood at the podium, I could see the reflection of the mountains through the glass wall behind the crowd. Even after all these years, those peaks still made me feel small and grateful to be. When the room quieted, I began, 6 months ago, this house was a war zone, I said. A battlefield between pride and principle. I thought I'd lost everything worth saving. But sometimes when life takes something away, it's only clearing space for something better. I looked around at the faces, the cameras, the light. This place isn't about me. It's about the people who still believe that hard work and honesty can build more than walls. My wife Margaret believed that the truest form of architecture is the one you build inside yourself, called character. Applause echoed softly through the hall. I smiled, remembering how she used to hum while sketching her pencil, tapping the rhythm of old hymns. She also believed that faith wasn't something you spoke about, it was something you practiced. Every blueprint, every choice, every act of courage was her prayer in disguise. And I think she'd be proud to see that her prayer didn't end with her. The crowd fell silent again. A few students wiped tears. Reverend Hale nodded quietly from the back row. I took a breath and continued. For anyone who's ever been betrayed by family, let me tell you something. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's wisdom. You don't forgive to erase the past. You forgive to reclaim your future. I paused, letting the words settle. Lucas couldn't be here today, I added, but I received a letter from him. He's building again, not skyscrapers, but small homes with his own hands. Maybe someday he'll walk through these doors, not as the man who tried to take everything, but as the man who finally learned what to give. The crowd stayed quiet. No applause this time, just understanding. It was better that way. I stepped down from the podium, walked to the piano, and placed a single white lily on top of it. Then I whispered the same words I'd spoken to Margaret on the night we bought this land 40 years ago. We did it, love. We built something that lasts. After the ceremony, I stood outside as the sun dipped behind the mountains. The valley below shimmered gold, and the sound of laughter spilled from the open doors behind me. A young boy, maybe 8, with sawdust on his sleeves, tugged at my coat. Mr. Langford, did you really design all these houses? I chuckled. Not all of them, son. Just the ones that stayed standing. He grinned, gap-toothed and curious. Will you teach us how? I looked down at him and said, that's the plan. He ran back toward the others, and I stood there a moment longer, watching the future walk on 2 small legs. Somewhere inside the house, someone began playing Margaret's piano. The melody floated through the evening air, simple and pure like forgiveness, finding its way home. Faith doesn't protect you from betrayal. It prepares you to rebuild after it. As the lights of the Langford Center glowed against the darkening hills, I realized something I wish I'd known years ago. Winning isn't about keeping what's yours. It's about giving it away before greed takes it from you. And that, I think, is how justice and grace finally meet. If you believe that faith, truth, and integrity still matter, share this story. Subscribe to Brian's Stories for more true stories of justice, family, and redemption. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight?